There are 5 ordinary things that can tell you a surprising amount about how well your body is functioning after 70. Not just your age. Not one number on the scale. Not how many pills are in your cabinet. 5 ordinary observable things. And most of them show up during a completely normal Saturday, in ways almost nobody notices. This is not a list of diseases to worry about. It's closer to the opposite. They are everyday clues that ordinary life may still fit comfortably inside what your body can do. And because they feel ordinary, people often miss the moment they begin to change. That's why the useful comparison is not you versus someone else. It's you versus you over time. So let's start with the first one, because you probably did it this morning without thinking about it once. Sign number 1 is your natural walking pace. Not how fast you can walk when someone's timing you. Not your treadmill speed. The pace your legs choose on their own when you're walking through a store, thinking about something else entirely. Meet John, he's 73. He does not consider himself fit, and he'd probably laugh if you called him athletic. On Saturday morning, he walks into the grocery store, and he's not thinking about his gait speed. Nobody is. But here's what's surprising about that unremarkable walk. Walking looks like a leg activity. It isn't. Comfortable walking is a surprisingly integrated task. Your heart and lungs have to support the effort, while your muscles and joints produce and tolerate force. Your balance and nervous systems have to coordinate each step fast enough that you don't consciously manage it. And your brain has to do all of that while you're thinking about something else entirely. That's why walking pace can be so informative. It is sampling multiple systems at once and turning them into one simple behavior. When one part of that system becomes more limiting, a common result is a slight slowing of the comfortable pace. Not dramatic, just enough that the change can hide inside everyday life. This is why researchers pay so much attention to it. A pooled JAMA analysis in 2011 combined 9 cohort studies. More than 34,000 adults aged 65 and older followed for 6 to 21 years, and found usual walking speed was associated with survival. One notable result was that models using age, sex, and walking speed performed about as well as models using a much longer list of medical information. That does not mean walking faster makes you live longer. The study was observational. It means walking speed can act as a useful summary signal, a readout, not a lever you pull directly. So if your usual pace still feels like your usual pace, that's genuinely worth appreciating. A lot of separate systems have to be working for that to be true. Now here's the part that actually matters for you, and it's where most people get this wrong. Do not go looking up the normal walking speed for your age and compare yourself to it. That number varies enormously depending on height, leg length, terrain, footwear, health conditions, and how the measurement was taken. The far more useful comparison is against yourself 6 months or a year ago. And most people can answer that without equipment because the change often shows up in ordinary life. Do people you used to walk beside now naturally drift ahead? Does a familiar route now take noticeably longer than it used to? Those are observations, not diagnoses. And observations are how you notice a trend. One extra clue is what happens when walking and conversation compete for attention. Because walking uses more of your attention than it feels like it does. If you've started slowing noticeably or stopping altogether whenever a conversation gets demanding, that's worth noticing too. Again, not as a diagnosis, but as another change from your own baseline. One important distinction, because this is where people scare themselves unnecessarily. Everyone has slow days after poor sleep, sore knees, an illness, or simply a different pair of shoes. What matters is not one slow day. It's a persistent change that keeps showing up on routes you know well. If your usual pace has clearly changed, that's information worth bringing to a clinician rather than interpreting alone, because the possible reasons are very different. If this is the kind of explanation you find useful, where we take something ordinary and show you what's actually underneath it, subscribing genuinely helps more people find this channel. Now the second sign happens dozens of times a day, and most people never think about it as a test at all. Sign number 2 is that standing up still feels like one movement. Watch John get out of his kitchen chair on that same Saturday morning. He pushes the chair back and stands. One movement, he doesn't pause to think about it, because why would he? But that's exactly the point. Here's why that particular movement is worth paying attention to. Rising from a chair is a deceptively demanding everyday movement. Think about what's actually required. You have to move your center of mass forward over your feet, Then lift essentially your entire body weight upward, using mainly your thighs and hips, while your trunk stabilizes and your balance system prevents you from tipping in any direction. And here's the surprising part. This isn't just a strength test, it also depends heavily on power. Strength delivered quickly, along with balance and coordination. That distinction matters, because muscle power tends to decline earlier and faster with age than raw strength does. Which means a person can still be reasonably strong, able to carry heavy grocery bags, push a lawnmower, while the quick, coordinated push required to stand up smoothly has already started to change. That's exactly why this shows up before someone would ever describe themselves as weak. Here's a simple way to feel the difference. Strength is whether you can move a heavy suitcase. Power is how quickly you can produce force when a movement suddenly demands it, like catching your balance after a trip. That quick force becomes especially important in everyday reactions, which is why a smooth chair rise can reveal more than raw strength alone. There's a second half of the movement too, sitting back down. Lowering yourself under control asks the thigh muscles to resist gravity on the way down. When that control changes, the last few inches can become more of a drop than a sit. So if standing from your usual chairs still feels smooth and roughly as easy as it used to, that's worth appreciating. What does an early change look like? Usually not a sudden failure, but extra negotiation. Maybe you start using the armrest or a nearby counter more often than before. Maybe you rock forward for momentum, avoid a deep sofa, or pause longer before rising. Notice what all of those have in common. They're not failures, they're negotiations. The movement is still happening. The body is just recruiting more help to accomplish it than it used to. And that's genuinely useful information, because it's the earliest visible stage of a change, not the final one. Clinicians formalize this with repeated chair stand testing as part of standard physical performance assessment. But you don't need a stopwatch. The useful question is whether standing from your usual chairs has quietly become more effortful or more dependent on help than it used to be. And here's the encouraging part. Lower body strength and power can improve with progressive resistance training even in very old adults. Practicing the movement itself, controlled sit-to-stands, can also be a useful exercise. If you have knee, hip, or back problems, or you've had a recent fall, get guidance before pushing into pain. So walking pace tells you about your integrated system. Standing tells you about power and coordination. The third sign isn't about doing the task at all. It's about what happens in the hours afterward. Sign number 3 is that ordinary effort doesn't steal the rest of your day. Let's start with a reversal, because this one gets misunderstood constantly. Getting somewhat tired after effort can be completely normal. The body is supposed to respond when you ask it to work. John carries 2 bags of groceries from the car. He's breathing harder at the top of the steps. That's normal. That's the system working. The question that actually matters isn't whether the task tired him. It's what the next 2 hours look like. Because recovery can tell you something the effort itself doesn't. Here's the mechanism, in plain terms. When you exert yourself, heart rate and breathing rise, muscles use fuel, and the body temporarily moves away from its resting state. Recovery is the process of moving back toward that baseline. That process takes time and resources. A system with more functional capacity can absorb that disturbance and return toward its usual state without the task consuming the rest of the day. When the same task uses a larger share of what the body can comfortably handle, recovery may take longer. And while it does, the rest of the day can feel smaller. That's the whole idea. Not does effort tire me, but how much of my day does one ordinary task consume? So here's the practical question, and I'd encourage you to actually sit with it. Did the task get harder, or did the recovery get longer? Those feel identical from the inside, but they're not the same thing. And separating them is genuinely useful. Concretely, you carry the groceries in. 2 hours later, are you doing whatever you'd planned to do next, or is the afternoon quietly gone? You do the gardening on Saturday. Is Sunday a normal day, or a recovery day? You have a busy morning of errands. Does the evening still belong to you? Now, an important caution, because this is the sign that's easiest to overread. Persistent exhaustion is nonspecific. Poor sleep, medications, anemia, thyroid problems, heart or lung conditions, mood disorders, and simple deconditioning after an illness can all contribute. Some of those causes are treatable, which is one reason a persistent change deserves evaluation. That's why a new persistent change is something to have evaluated, not something to label as aging. And I want to say that clearly, because I'm just getting old is one of the most expensive assumptions a person can make. It's the assumption that stops people from finding the treatable thing. Notice also how this sign connects to the two before it. If recovery is taking longer, you may naturally do a little less. And doing less can affect walking pace and standing power over time. Which brings us directly to the fourth sign. And it's the one people are most likely to get wrong about themselves. Sign number 4 is that movement still finds its way into your day on its own. And I want to start here. Because many people over 60 say some version of this, I don't really exercise. John says it. He'd tell you he isn't active. And by his own definition, that's true. He doesn't go to a gym. He doesn't have a program. He doesn't own workout clothes. But watch his actual Saturday. He walks to the car, through the store, and back. He carries the bags in and puts groceries away, reaching, bending, and standing again. Later, he works in the garden and uses the stairs without counting either one as exercise. John doesn't exercise. He also spends a meaningful part of the day moving. And here's the distinction that makes this sign so important. There is exercise, deliberate, scheduled, named. And then there is total daily movement, everything else. The errands, the stairs, the standing, the carrying, the walking to and from things. In sheer minutes, ordinary movement can make up far more of the day than formal exercise does. 30 minutes of exercise is 30 minutes. The rest of the day still matters because long periods of sitting and repeated opportunities to move are part of the same overall activity pattern. And there's a mechanical reason this matters. Muscle and bone respond to physical demand, not to whether we call something exercise. Daily movement does not replace training. What it does is keep basic movements practiced and prevent long stretches of inactivity from swallowing the rest of the day. There's a useful comparison here. Imagine two people the same age. One walks on a treadmill for 30 minutes each morning, then sits for most of the remaining day. The other never exercises at all, but is up and down all day, errands, stairs, garden, carrying things, standing in the kitchen. Most people would assume the first person is more active. Depending on the day, the second person may actually accumulate far more total movement. But these aren't substitutes for each other, and I don't want to leave that ambiguous. Structured exercise provides a stronger training stimulus. That's what it's for, and it's genuinely valuable. Daily movement solves a different problem. It keeps long stretches of complete inactivity from taking over the rest of the day. You want both. The mistake is measuring your activity only by the part of the day that has a name. This matters because of how movement usually disappears with age. It rarely disappears through a decision. Almost nobody says, I'm going to stop being active now. What happens instead is that reasons to move quietly disappear, one at a time, often for perfectly sensible reasons. Groceries get delivered, so the store trip vanishes. Someone else takes over the yard work, or a painful knee interrupts a walking habit that never quite restarts. Each decision can make perfect sense on its own. Together, they can remove a surprising amount of daily movement without a conscious choice to become less active. So the useful question is not, am I exercising enough? It's, how many reasons do I still have to get up, walk somewhere, carry something, and climb something on an ordinary day? And the practical fix follows directly from that framing. One way to rebuild that movement is to put safe reasons to move back into the day. Walk into the store for the small shop instead of having it delivered. Take the stairs once a day on purpose, if stairs are already safe and comfortable for you. Get up during TV instead of waiting until the end of the program. None of that requires equipment, workout clothes, or a formal exercise session. It's restoring the ordinary demand your body used to receive automatically. Now, 4 signs so far, and they're all about capability. The 5th one isn't, and it's the one that catches people completely off guard. Sign number 5 is that your weight isn't quietly disappearing. And I know how that sounds. Because for most of adult life, the scale going down is treated as unambiguously good news. So let's be precise, because this is the most misunderstood sign of the 5. The distinction that matters is intentional versus unintentional. If you've changed how you eat, increased your activity, and the number is coming down, that's a result. That's what's supposed to happen, and for many people it's genuinely beneficial. Unintentional weight loss is different. That's weight coming off when you haven't changed anything, often without you noticing until your pants stop fitting the same way. Why does that carry such different meaning? It comes down to what's actually leaving. When unexplained weight comes off, some of what is lost can be muscle, not just fat. And after 60, that matters because muscle helps you stand, stay steady, and recover from illness. So the same number on the scale can mean two completely opposite things depending on why it moved. That's the whole point. This is not a fringe concern. Unintentional weight loss is one of the 5 criteria in the influential Freed physical frailty phenotype developed from the cardiovascular health study and published in 2001. Those 5 criteria are unintentional weight loss, self-reported exhaustion, weakness measured by grip strength, slow walking speed, and low physical activity. You may have noticed that several of the signs in this video overlap with the same domains researchers have used for decades to study physical frailty. We're not reproducing those criteria. The research versions are measured in specific, standardized ways. We're looking at that broader idea from the other direction. What does preserved everyday function look like before any of those problems become obvious? Now, the practical part, which is where this gets genuinely useful. Unintentional weight loss in older adults often has an underlying explanation, and some of those causes are treatable. Appetite can change with age, and medications can alter hunger or taste. Dental problems, swallowing difficulty, depression, and medical conditions such as thyroid or digestive disorders can also contribute. And sometimes the explanation is social. Cooking for one can make meals smaller and simpler without anyone deciding to eat less. None of that is a diagnosis you should make at home. It's a reason to get unexplained loss looked at rather than explained away. An often cited clinical threshold is losing around 5% of body weight over 6 to 12 months without trying. For a 170-pound person, that's roughly 8 or 9 pounds. That's a rough guide for when to raise it with a doctor, not a diagnostic line. And here's the piece I'd most want you to take away. The sign is not, I weigh less than I did at 40. Plenty of people do, for good reasons. The sign is, my weight is changing, and I can't explain why. Unexplained is the operative word. If you know why, that's data. If you don't know why, that's a question for your doctor. And remember, a stable scale doesn't guarantee stable muscle. The same total weight can hide a shift in body composition. Preserving muscle still depends on using it and on adequate nutrition, including enough protein overall. The exact amount depends on the person, so individual guidance from a clinician or dietitian matters more than a universal number from a video. So let's put all 5 together, because they're much more useful as a system than as a checklist. Walking pace, standing up, recovery from ordinary effort, movement appearing naturally in your day, stable, explainable weight. Look at what these 5 actually have in common. None of them diagnoses a disease. Together, they show how well your body is supporting ordinary life, movement, recovery, daily activity, and the tissue that makes those things possible. And all of them can change gradually, which is precisely why they're worth noticing. The gradual changes are the ones people explain away. They also interact. If recovery takes longer, you may naturally do a little less. Doing less can reduce daily movement, which can affect strength and walking pace over time. A lower appetite can simplify meals, which can make it harder to maintain the tissue that does the moving. That's not a prediction about anyone. It's a reminder that these domains are connected, so a change in one can influence the others. So here's how I'd actually use this, and it takes almost no effort. Don't test yourself today. A single measurement tells you very little. Instead, write down 5 honest sentences and put them somewhere you'll find them. How fast do I walk on my usual route compared to a year ago? Has standing up from my usual chairs become noticeably more effortful or more dependent on help than it was a year ago? What does the afternoon look like after a busy morning? How many reasons to move exist in my normal day? Is my weight steady? And can I explain any change? If nothing concerning changes sooner, look at those 5 sentences again in 6 months. Because the value here is rarely in a single snapshot. It's in the direction of travel, and direction is only visible when you have 2 points to compare. That's the entire method. Not a score, not a grade. A comparison against yourself. And one clear boundary before we finish. Nothing in this video diagnoses anything. And none of these 5 signs should be interpreted alone. New or worsening exhaustion, unexplained weight loss, a noticeable change in walking or balance, new shortness of breath or a fall deserve medical attention rather than conclusions reached at home. Several of the changes behind them can have treatable causes. And if you want, tell me in the comments, Which of these 5 still feels strongest for you, and which one has changed the most over the last few years? So let's end where we started, with John, 73, who doesn't think of himself as fit. He walked the store at his own pace. He stood up from his chair. He carried the bags in and still had his afternoon. He moved for hours without calling any of it exercise, and his weight is roughly what it was last year. 5 signs, all of them present. None of them noticed by him for a second. That's the real point of this video. These things are not achievements you earn at a gym. They're what an ordinary Saturday looks like when the machinery underneath is still doing its job quietly. Your body doesn't announce when ordinary life starts costing more than it used to. It just quietly asks for a little more help. A hand on the table, a slower step, a longer sit-down afterward. Which means the most valuable thing you can do isn't to test yourself. It's to notice.